Right. Hello and welcome everyone to this week's episode of the Open Wheel FM podcast. My name is Nicholas Clay and we have a lot to talk about. It was an exciting, exhausting, heartfelt weekend with a lot of things. This is probably the most content intensive episode yet. And a lot of that has to do with simply, everything leading up to, the greatest spectacle in American motorsport, along with, the actual racing itself, which I will be talking about in this week's episode as well. I don't really want to beat around the bush, so I kind of just want to jump right in to this. But before I do, I just wanted to say that if you like this week's episode of the Open Wheel FM podcast, make sure to give this episode a like and make sure that you're following this podcast on your listening platform of choice. Just so you could stay up to date, whether you're on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, if you follow and get content on Instagram or TikTok of the shorts that I post. Your support, your unwavering support means a lot to me as I continue to grow this Open Wheel podcast. I want to make it the best one yet. So without further ado, let's jump into this week's episode because we have a lot to go over. Now, I don't really... I feel like it's been said enough, and if you've been kind of following along, I felt like this was a necessary part to put into this episode. I know that it's been a little bit of time, not too much time, but I think it's also just important for those who have been kind of following the situation, and I just wanted to give my own thoughts and my own impact on this. But we were unfortunately dealt a very big blow in the motorsport community with the passing of Kyle Busch last week. I don't even know where to start with this. For as long as I've watched NASCAR, I don't watch as much NASCAR anymore, but to see someone who I watched for many years, through it all, who had such a huge impact on the lives of so many different people, I was honestly shocked when I heard the news. I knew that he had withdrawn from the Coca-Cola 600 because of some health issues. I know that he had talked about it leading up to the event. There was some events prior to that he had some sinus issues, but to get notice on that day of his passing was just a hit to my heart, man. It was horrible. And I and everyone in the motorsport community, I know that they came out in full force, and I just wanted to say that as we get through this season, I just wanted to give my own prayers to Kyle Busch's family, Sam, the kids, all of that. I know that I'm not the only one that has been talking about this, but, collectively as a motorsport community, it's important for us to come together through hardship like this. And it was incredible to see the number 8s across IndyCar and obviously the NASCAR event this weekend, which I did watch. I won't really talk about it because this is an open wheel podcast, but just the impact that he had on motorsport as a whole, on the NASCAR community, just a person that he was, the fact that he was a fierce competitor, and he always loved racing, and I think that really showed through. And the fact that he has a young son who has a army of supporters behind him as he progresses through the lower series. It's going to be really cool to see Brexton, in the Cup Series one day, because he has so many supporters here, and just heartbreaking. just I'm a loss for words for that. Um, I think it shows that, you need to appreciate those moments so much more. And I'm really glad, that, his team opted not to run that car, decided to go with the 33, and, they're reserving that car for his son. So, uh, it's going to be tough, but uh, it's just one of those things where I was very emotional about it, and I still am because it was just such a big blow to it all. But rest in peace, Kyle Busch, Rowdy. I hope that you're watching down upon everyone, and I wish we could see you race one more time. Um, your son Brexton is going to do great things. So, but I just wanted to make this segment a part to really just say that happened, and it's going to be hard to recover from this as a as a motorsport community. NASCAR, I know I don't talk about NASCAR, but that was significant, and it honestly impacted, I think, everyone. And so I think it's just important for us all to come together and remember that life is short, and that these athletes who put their lives on the line to entertain us are just people on, at the end of the day, right? Whether you loved Kyle Busch or not. So rest in peace, Rowdy. All right. So segueing in from the heartfelt section to the big event that I have been looking forward to, and most people have been looking forward to, penciled in on their calendar, was the Indianapolis 500. Obviously, with the news of Kyle Busch, it was very hard. There was some murmur around the paddock. He was actually supposed to race the Indy 500. He was talking about doing it. The contract kind of fell through, but he always wanted to do the event. So I think there was just additional sadness for that, because we wouldn't be able to see him race for the Indy 500. But there was also a lot of hype, a lot of spectacle. There was sold out crowds per usual. The Fox broadcast, right? Obviously being on Fox was a really big deal for IndyCar. And I didn't love the advertisements that kept on coming through. I understood that they have their airtime that they need to do, but regardless, though, going into the race, there was a couple things that were, being talked about. The first one, obviously, was Alexander Rossi, who on Monday suffered an injury to his left hand and his ankle. He was cleared on Thursday before the race, while they were doing the media day, that that he was cleared to race in the actual race. When they were doing the driver announcements for everyone in the field based on their positioning, we saw both David Malukas and Alex Palou helping an Alexander Rossi in crutches. So that was pretty cool to see. That was kind of the talk. I mean, he was starting on P2. We know that he's very fast around here. He was a proven winner. We just didn't really know to what extent would those affect his overall performance. We know that he's a very skilled and strong driver, physically and mentally. So it was definitely something that was talked about within the paddock throughout it all. And then I think the other talk is how good was how good would Alex Palou have to be to win this race? We know that, starting just, 2 spots over from him was David Malukas, who put on a really good qualifying performance. We know that the Penske car has historically been pretty good around Indy, and we weren't really expecting anything less of that. We know that Joseph Newgarden did not qualify great, but he has also had opportunities from even the farthest part on the of the grid to be able to make an appearance during the race. So there was kind of some of that. I actually had Joseph Newgarden as kind of a dark horse, and we kind of did get that as the race did start. We did see Rossi get a good jump. We know being in P1 is not always ideal around Indy, specifically with the longevity, the effects that it has on the car being out there. That slipstream is actually very important in oval racing in general. So, I think Palou kind of played it a little conservative. They did a little do-si-do between each other. And it was very interesting to see the early performance of the Ed Carpenter car, which we know had the pace, and him being up there, it looked like Rossi, had an opportunity to be in contention earlier on in the race, but we did know that he was in a backup car for this race. So he was using a car from previous. It was spec'd, but there was just a lot of things against him for that. And we did see some early movement in the Indy 500 from Joseph Newgarden, who made up the most positions until he was ultimately knocked out of the race due to a crash later on. Lap 18, we saw what could have been a pretty gnarly collision. Ryan Hunter-Reay, spun out, came up on the track, and Leg tried her best to avoid the action from that. She ultimately was knocked out of the race for someone who was doing the full 1,150 miles. She was unfortunately unable to make that happen. And both of those drivers were knocked out. It was disappointing. McLaren hasn't really had the best showing, I would say, this Indy 500. They brought in Ryan Hunter-Reay with the hope that, maybe they were going to be better. Pato had a pretty decent qualifying, all things considered. The car looked very uneasy. It was a big reason why Ryan Hunter-Reay kind of fell out into that turn 2, which is very infamous for catching drivers out. And that was what happened earlier on. We did see the caution flag. When you were watching the actual recap of it, it looked like it could have been a disaster. A T-bone from Leg into Ryan Hunter-Reay potentially would have been a very gruesome collision. Thankfully, it was avoided. She did her avoiding action from that. And the race, kind of transpired from there. Within the first pit stop, we did see Rosenqvist move up. He was an early winner in that first pit stop. And then Scott McLaughlin also was able to rise up to third for those who pitted. It was a very poor pit stop for Rossi, which saw him, drop back about 13 positions, I think. And that was not the end of his poor fortunes, as he ultimately did have to retire the car. There was an issue with the back. It started to smoke up during the race, and unfortunately he had to retire that car for the second straight year after having such an excellent qualifying. It was just disappointing, right? And then on lap 27, we did get a collision between Ed Carpenter and Takuma Sato, where we saw a very animated Ed Carpenter after the race, pointing his finger and saying some very vulgar words to the Japanese driver as he was driving around. 3 drivers getting caught out around turn 1 is a very common place to get caught out, especially if you're getting caught between that. And that was it for his running. So you had 2 Ed Carpenter cars who were out of the field. It was really just Rasmussen, who was the last one, who, it was kind of up to him to have any opportunity with them losing two cars the way that they did. It was pretty cool to see earlier on. I did make note of this. Kyle Collette, he stayed out a little bit longer. He moved up into the front of the field and was able to get some running for himself. For him to be able to build that confidence around here, I mentioned this in my previous episode of the podcast, which I recommend going and checking out. It is an audio only, unfortunately. I had some issue with the video quality. I was able to get the audio for it, but I did say that Kyle Collette is going to be a dark horse in the future to win the Indy 500. He looked so confident around here, and for him to get some of that front running opportunity, it was really cool to see. He was kind of fighting it out at the front, and it was just really cool to see a rookie lead for that stint. Towards the 60 to 80 lap mark during the race, we saw some strategy being played from the Chip Ganassi boys of Dixon and Palou. There was some questions, and we did see some cautions come out for some rain. We did get a slight rain delay, and we passed that crucial 100 lap mark where they could classify the race based on who was in front. Scott Dixon was the one that was leading the race as he was looking for his second Indy 500 race victory. It wouldn't come to be, unfortunately for him, if you've looked at the results, he wasn't the one that was able to win, but he did lead a couple of the laps there and then. Palou and him switched places back and forth, trying to conserve the fuel load for them and the tires to kind of extend that lead a little bit further on. And then as we kind of approached past the halfway point, we started to see two different strategies kind of come out through this. We saw the early pitters come through. This was your Alex Palou. Sorry, not your Alex Palou. Pardon me. We saw your Pato Award. We saw your Felix Rosenqvist, and we saw your Marcus Armstrong were all ones that pitted earlier on, and they all kind of pitted within about 3 laps of each other. Pato pitting slightly earlier than the rest. He would ultimately have to stay on a fuel-saving mode, but it was ultimately that was the strategy that came out to be the winning strategy in the end, or at least the one that looked the best as the final few laps were coming to an end. The front runners of Alex Palou and Daly and Scott McLaughlin, they were all ones. David Malukas, they all pitted later than them, and so they had to then eventually pit. It was about 50 laps on the top of my head. I don't remember exactly, but they needed to kind of pit one more time. And pitting a little bit earlier meant that they were kind of able to be out there to have that, to extend that where they needed to. And it ended up being the best strategy up until we did see Kyle Collette. He hit the top wall at the with 8 laps to go, which caused a red flag to come out. With 6 laps to go, that's kind of where all the action really transpired. Pato Award, who had about 2 laps less of fuel, was having to save all the way to the very end of the race with Felix Rosenqvist, who was in the best position to take the race at that point with 2 more laps of fuel for him. So he wasn't in fuel-saving mode there. And then he was able to pass Pato Award before the red flag came out, and we did see some saving conservation as some of the front-running pack of David Malukas and Alex Palou started to come back up the field with full force as they were kind of pushing with better fuel, with fresher tires. And on the restart from that, it ended up coming down to another caution flag that saw Marcus Armstrong go out into P1 in front. And it really came down to three drivers at the very end with 2 laps to go. And this is where all of the chaos and craziness really transpired. On the final lap, we saw both of them take. David Malukas in the lead, was able to get the jump on that as he kept going. Him leading in, we saw there was some side-by-side action between Felix and Marcus. Ultimately, it was a very gutsy outside move from Felix that propelled him forward into the final turn, where he was able to get the run up and the photo finish ending from the race as he was able to pass David Malukas to cross the bricks and be an Indy 500 winner. Absolutely insane. I have been watching motorsport for a while, and that was probably the craziest ending I've ever seen in a race. I mean, the Pato and Joseph Newgarden finish a couple years ago was absolutely insane. This one was literally insane, and will be a finish that we will be talking about for years, with how close it was. It was 0. Let's see. I actually had so it was 0.023 seconds. So 23 thousandths of a second separated David Malukas and Felix. And it was Felix who was able to come out in the strip, and he was able to come out of the slipstream, which saw him take victory for himself. He is the third Swedish driver to win the Indy 500 for himself. An absolute heartbreak for David Malukas, who will have to wait yet another year at a chance to secure himself an Indy 500 victory. The month of May has just been unforgiving for him, unable to win the road course. He was so close to getting his first victory there. And then 23 thousandths away from potentially him being the victor of the Indy 500. It was everything that you could have asked for as a spectator to watch the race this weekend. And it was awesome. The amount of eyes that were on the event. I'm so excited to see, IndyCar grow from here, with as many people watching the spectacle of the race, with Fox being able to broadcast all of it going down. It gave you everything that you needed to. And it gives me, again, a lot of excitement to see where the future of the sport goes. I think that we had a very competitive Indy 500. It was a little bit cooler than, your traditional, year, which I think brought the field into a more competitive window across the board. I think that the driving participation across the top echelon of your drivers around, the Indy 500 and the Bulls, right, to, all the way down to like your midfield pack. I think the talent pool that we have in Indy is so good, at its current core right now, that I think it made for an excellent race. And I can't wait. I am penciling it in, and I'm hoping that I can go to the Indy 500 in the future, because that's on my bullet, it's on my bullet board, on my bucket list. I'm hoping that I can go and watch it. It'd be really cool next year to go and see it, but definitely in the future, the plan is for me to go and attend that race, because that was insane. As a spectator on TV, watching it live as it happened, utter insanity. But again, though, props to Meyershank Racing, their second victory at the Indy 500. the closest Indy 500 in history. I mean, it was insane, and the celebrations didn't stop there. It was really awesome to see the amount of support, people watching. Again, I watched from the Indy 500 race into the F1 race, which was a lot different in its own way, but to see the drivers excited to see who won the Indy 500 race, that were Formula One drivers as well. We know that people from NASCAR were tuning in. It brings people together to watch, IndyCar, and it was a tremendous success in obviously the outcome of the race, but the overall spectacle itself, definitely chef's kiss. It was uh, absolute cinema. But yeah, so I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about kind of my thoughts, some of the players that kind of came into the picture, some of the duds that I thought were going to look a little bit better. Obviously, the big turning point was the alternative strategy, pitting slightly earlier, being able to pit before the front runners, and then obviously being far enough ahead, with enough fuel, um, gave way to some of those drivers that were slightly behind. Someone who looked to be in contention as a rookie was Dennis Hauger, who kind of came out of nowhere in his race strategy. Unfortunately, he had a penalty and a drive-through for himself, which took him out of that race. But him getting that exposure, he's only going to get better from there. Mick Schumacher as well. I mean, he had a great running. It was clean up until he hit the wall, which caused the last caution to come out. But he looked, pretty confident throughout. Obviously, he wasn't the fastest, and he was just trying to get his car over the line, gain that experience from himself. I talked, about Kyle Collette in that position as well as a rookie. Until he, burned out and lost his car. He looked very solid, and I'm saying it and I'm telling you now, you gotta watch out for him moving forward. The final classification of the race was Felix Rosenqvist on top. In second was David Malukas. Scott McLaughlin was third. It was Pato O'Ward in fourth, Marcus Armstrong in fifth, Rinus VeeKay in sixth, Alex Palou in seventh, Santino Ferrucci in eighth, continuing his trend, in top 10 finishes for himself. The consistency is there. That's definitely someone to keep note of, right? Had he had maybe a better pit stop the first go around and stayed up there potentially. We had Romain Grosjean as well being in that P9 spot, and then rounding out the top 10 was Takuma Sato. Excellent race. I don't really know what else to say. I mean, you can go watch the clips and the highlights for it. It was excellent. Definitely great for the sport of IndyCar. We will be going to Detroit, which is a little bit not my favorite track on the calendar at all, but May is done and we'll be coming to a close afterwards. But it was a very good month of May for IndyCar, and this season looks good. Potentially, could we see people contest Palou? Malukas moved into second in the standings for himself. I think he's just waiting for his race win to come. I think Kyle Kirkwood, had a little bit more to say during the Indy 500. Wasn't able to get a great qualifying. I think that's what hurt him a lot. And I think it's going to be a good second half of the season. I think Alex Palou may just win it all again, but to see some of these drivers maybe get a couple race wins here or there towards the end is going to be really exciting. So definitely know that we'll be talking a lot about the coming races in IndyCar, because it's been exciting. I think IndyCar has proven to be probably the best spectacle of the open wheel series in recent time. I think Formula One, Formula E is getting more competitive. It's getting better with the Gen 4 cars coming. So a lot to say, a lot to see. And it was just really great. Also, I thought it was really cool that we did see Daniel Ricciardo and Lando Norris. There was that picture with him and Daly. Lando actually came from Canada and went to go see and partake in the celebrations. It was cool to see a Formula One world champion. As of me recording this, he actually did do some laps with Tony Kanaan around IMS. So who knows, right? Maybe we'll see more F1 drivers give the Indy 500 a shot in the future, especially after what we were given this year. So the crossovers there, we'll just have to wait and see. But speaking of crossing over, we will be talking and jumping into the Canada GP that happened this race weekend. But before that, if you like this episode and you like what I'm saying, let me know down below what you thought of the Indy 500 race this past weekend. What were your thoughts on it all? Was it positive? I would hope so. I think that the finish was insane. So let me know what you think. I'd love to hear what you have to say. And if you had any other questions or anything that you wanted me to address maybe in next week's episode, feel free to drop those in the comment section below. Jumping over, I guess not across the pond this weekend, but up into Canada, which was very close. In Montreal, we were at the Circuit des I always mess up how to say it. I'm going to learn how to say it one day. But the Canadian GP took place in Montreal, and this was a pretty significant race for a lot of reasons. The first one was Kimi Antonelli coming off of a 3-race in a row victory. The question is would he be able to replicate that and make that 4? Spoilers, he was able to do so, but I think the main question was his teammate, George Russell, and whether or not George Russell, who this has probably been his best track in all of Formula One, being able to put it on pole, which would end up being pole 3 seasons in a row, which is pretty incredible. He gets this track, and it was whether or not he would be able to bounce back from, I would say, a disappointing start to the season. It hasn't gone his way. And that would unfortunately continue on and be a trend in Canada, as I will be talking about. Also, the Canada GP was the final race that counts for the FIA and their first ADUO assessment. And basically, there was a lot of upgrades from all the teams except for, I think it was Ferrari and Aston that didn't bring anything. There was a pretty sizable package from Mercedes being brought this weekend. So whether they would be the outright best team continually, whether McLaren, who was bringing their upgrades into this race weekend, whether they would be the team that could contest and continue to compete with them, right? Having the same power unit, powering both of their cars. For those who don't know, the ADUO assessment, basically cars that have a 2 to 4% deficit between the best internal combustion engine on the field, which is Mercedes, would be able to get additional time to fix and upgrade their own ICE, and they would get additional development for that, and then teams that had an even greater deficit, larger than 4%, would get 2 times during the season, this season and next season, of additional development onto their powertrains to kind of give them that opportunity. The only one that's really showing that would be Honda. That's greater than the 4%, but we know that they're in a unique position with the FIA, the FOM, and the paddock as a whole. They're getting additional support for themselves, which is drastically needed, and we will probably be seeing a lot more work done on that Aston Martin as the midpoint of the season comes around and they get more work done on that. It seems like they've been able to fix their power unit struggles with the vibration, which is a step in the right direction. Time will tell whether they will be competitive, if it's going to end up happening more as we get halfway through, or it's really just going to be 2027. They're going to probably stop their development. I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. Them not bringing any upgrades this weekend, I think, is saying that they're probably going to be doing some more work and testing. We'll be going to Monaco next week, so I doubt we'll see any significant upgrades from them in Monaco. It's just, that's not really a track that you'll see that. So it might be the following track in Barcelona where we actually see a package upgrade for Aston. But that is for Canada, this is the last race for that assessment period. And yeah. So let me talk about the winning driver for me this weekend. Although Kimi did win, to me, this was a statement weekend for Lewis Hamilton. And let me tell you why. So Lewis came into the weekend. There was talk about, is he going to stay at Ferrari? There was the retirement question going on, which is absurd to me that that's kind of the conversation that we're having here. There was the talk about Esteban coming into the race weekend, Haas and, Ollie Behrman replaced. It was just a bunch of unnecessariness going on with all of that. But at the center of it was Lewis Hamilton. And for a guy who, since he put on the Scarlet Red as a Ferrari driver, it just hasn't worked out for him. This race weekend in Canada looked the most confident, the most assertive, the most joyous that I've seen from Lewis Hamilton as a driver in I don't even know how long. This was a complete weekend for him. Yeah, he fumbled a little bit in the third qualifying for the race. He looked the better of the two Ferraris throughout the entire weekend. There was no competition there. He said that the race pace was there as well. During the race, when he, towards the end, he said, look, team, we're going to go and get Max for P2. It was a very good showing for him. He was very confident, and he talked very well throughout the entire weekend about the direction of the car, the way that it felt, and that is a very good sign for him and Ferrari if they are going to want to take it to McLaren in the constructors, and as the season progresses, right? If Ferrari gets the ADUO changes for themselves, you need a confident and talented, which we know he's talented, Lewis Hamilton at each and every race. And this was his most complete race as a Ferrari driver. There is no question about it. He looked very good. Definitely deserving of, getting driver of the day. I think he got driver of the day. If he didn't, he definitely deserved it because this was his weekend. On the flip side, his teammate Leclerc said on Saturday that this was the worst weekend of his F1 career, which might be a little exaggerative, but he was not having it this race weekend. And he basically scratched off this weekend and said, I'm going to Monaco, and I know that I can win there. I'm very good there. So in a race weekend where Lewis looked very good, Charles did not look good at all. He was just not having it. So, and that's just the Ferrari side of things. So we got into the sprint. I just wanted to talk about the sprint real quick. We saw a lot of back and forth between the Mercedes drivers, and that was something where we didn't know what we were going to get. Were we going to get the gloves off? Are they going to fight each other? Turns out they were, almost to a point where it looked disastrous at times. A couple lockups, almost looked as if Kimi was going to rear end George in that race. There was back and forth around the apex. Kimi was making some comments over the radio that Toto Wolff did not like at all. Had to come on the radio and say, look, man, you cannot say these over the radio. We're going to do this internally. Basically got chewed out. So very, I wouldn't say spontaneous is the word, but a very assertive Kimi Antonelli on the radio in the race as well. I mean, it was great. To me, I never liked how McLaren handled last year's season, being very passive with their drivers, being very scared with their drivers. Obviously, these regulations allow for kind of that back and forth that maybe 2025 didn't have, but I really liked the gutsiness from both George Russell and Kimi Antonelli, who were out front. Lando was kind of able to take advantage during the sprint and get his way back up there, but Mercedes just looked like they just had the better car, and Kimi was able to come back, and it was George, Kimi, and Lando who took out and rounded out the podium for the sprint. Then moving into the qualifying for the race, it was George Russell who put it on pole position for himself, the third consecutive year in a row. Again, this guy just, he gets this track, and the Mercedes car was very good. The weather was in favor of the Mercedes. Being in those cooler temperatures, we know that car excels really, really well here. And it looked like maybe George could potentially, take back a little bit of the race, at least in terms of the Drivers' Championship. During the race, he could take a little bit off of Kimi. It might be his to lose, but as we saw in the sprint, George was under heavy pressure from Kimi and Lando. The race, he was under heavy pressure from his teammate Kimi for about 30 laps until George Russell ended up having to retire. It was basically George and Kimi fighting out front in front of everyone. The McLarens were completely non-existent because they did one of the most questionable tire start strategies I've seen in recent years with the inter tires going on. So the McLarens were out of the picture this race. It was basically between the two Mercedes cars to duke it out, and they did for 30 laps. Both drivers on the edge, attacking each other. They had a large enough gap that the drivers behind them in Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton weren't even a factor in the race for the first place and second place position. And it looked like, Kimi was the faster driver on the day, but George kept him honest. I thought it was a very good back and forth between the two drivers, and it was so awesome to see, the back and forth between coming out of the back straight into like the wall of champions down into turn one. So literally from the hairpin of 10 all the way until turn one, it was just utter chaos. No one in the entire field could figure out how to get their car around turn 10 all the cars were just slipping through. They weren't able to get the apex necessary to turn back. And it was just one of those things where, one Mercedes driver would lose it in turn 10, the other one would come back on the back straight, would pass, and then using the final energy, the other one would kind of come through in turn 1 into turn 2. Was just utter chaos. And it was just back and forth for 30 laps. And we were like, wow, are we going to get this for the entire duration of the race? It ended up not happening. George Russell having to retire his car on lap 31, which was heartbreaking, to say the least, for him. For a driver who's had a very unlucky span of races with, the safety car in Japan coming out, with a poor, I would say, qualifying outcome in China for himself. It hasn't gone well for him, and for him to lose out not only from his teammate, but to get no points at all and lose out on 25 was heartbreaking. The shots of him behind the fenced area on the side, he threw out the harness, not the harness, the neck, whatever the neck support is, out of the track. He ended up getting fined for it. The aggression, the disappointment, there was so much going on in that moment. And it was really the only one that could actually compete against Kimi for the rest of the race. It was Kimi's race to just run ahead. And that's where we are at with this Mercedes car. Just no one's able to compete with them in that regard, maybe with the exception of the McLarens keeping them honest. But when George was out of the race, it was Kimi's race to lose at the end of the day. And for George, being now 43 points down in the championship, it's tough. I mean, even last year's championship, the biggest gap was 34 between Oscar and Lando. The gap is now significantly wider between George and Kimi in a era of car where the Mercedes just looks like the most dominant car of the field, where each race weekend may just be Mercedes 1-2. And that is not good news if you're George Russell, because that means that you literally have to beat your teammate every single race. And if we've seen how Kimi has battled George in Canada and previous, how he's been driving, the confidence on him, the aggression from him, it's going to be really tough for George to claw back 43 points. It's not over. There's 17 races, but definitely heartbreak for him. And the continued unluckiness just continues to come through. George actually made a comment in the post-race. Let me see if I can find it here with my notes. I just wanted to see if I could find it. Yeah, so he said, disbelief. It feels like somebody doesn't want me to fight or complete for this championship. 3 out of the last 5 races, there's been something really going against us. Just a bit lost for words right now. So there's still, and in Formula One, right, the lead could shift in a single race. Kimi may have issues of reliability one race, and that could swing the points right back into George's favor. George, I think, had a very good attitude eventually when he cooled off, talking to the media pen, optimism. And I think that's all that he can do at this point, is have that. Now, I hinted at it, and it seems like this season may be the season where Mercedes just runs ahead in this championship. The McLarens being completely out of that race really sucked, because there was no one to keep either of the Mercedes honest. There wasn't like a an undercut opportunity that was presented because, that was just how it ended up turning out to be. Across the field, reliability was a huge, huge issue. Lots of penalties being handed out. And the Mercedes were just able to go out front. McLaren, with their pit strategy, I have no idea what they were thinking. Basically threw away a good chunk of points for this weekend, and it wasn't just Lando's DNF that sucked because of car reliability, but a 10-second penalty for Oscar Piastri as he made contact with Alex Albon, who was already having a very unlucky weekend for himself. Saw Oscar completely out of the opportunity to probably get any points, which he didn't. So just no points for McLaren during that race, and them looking at it, going to Monaco. Hopefully, we may see someone else challenge Mercedes right now, but it looks like with the upgrades working really well for that car, and with upcoming tracks being very energy dependent, the Mercedes seems to be the best at handling that. Either them or Red Bull. So it may just be a walk in the park. I don't know. We'll just have to see. But I did want to praise a driver besides Lewis Hamilton, and that's Liam Lawson. I think he looked very good. He was on the broadcast and kind of talked about it, and he said that a lot of guys were tired and we just survived. And he survived pretty well. He put on a very good defensive show against Pierre Gasly. He had an issue with hydraulics, so he wasn't able to qualify for the sprint. He was already on the back foot going into qualifying, just not having enough running because of the hydraulic issue during practice. He has been silently making himself very known to have very good race weekends for that Racing Bulls team. Came together with some very good points. His teammate, Arvid Lindblad, looked excellent all weekend. An unfortunate failure to start on his car left him out of the race after he qualified Did he qualify P8, I think? P8 or P9 in the race. So he looked excellent all weekend long. That Racing Bulls car didn't look too bad. But Liam coming forth and getting a couple points for his team was definitely needed because they did lose that car, and he's the 11th best qualifier on the grid this season. Definitely wanted to give him some of his roses. And then another driver who had an excellent race weekend was Franco Colapinto, who outqualified Pierre Gasly and placed better than him for the second consecutive race in a row. The upgrades since Miami have worked very well for him. He said in the post-race that the time spent with the 5 weeks between Japan and Miami gave him and the team a lot of opportunity to look back, fix things up, and become a lot stronger. And we've seen that. And that's definitely what's going to be needed for Alpine to potentially secure P5 in the championship. And for him and his driving aspirations within Formula One, it has been very good for him. He's definitely making a point to say, look, Alpine, I'm here for the long run, and I deserve a contract for the future to stay in Formula One. I think he's made that very clear the last couple races. Very good drive for him. Kudos to Franco Colapinto because he's looked lights out for the team in pink. So with all of that and everything coming forth, at the end of the race, we were given a battle that I thought was very ominous of 2021 between two unlikely people that I would have never thought would be fighting for P2 this year. But again, with George DNFing, with Oscar and Lando completely out of the picture, it was Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen that were fighting for that P2 spot. And it was a very good fight, a very good defense by Max. it seemed like Hamilton just had a little bit more in that Ferrari car this weekend, able to mitigate some of those power unit issues that the Ferrari has, especially in the straights, to come out on top. And it ultimately ended up being a Kimi Antonelli victory with a podium of Lewis Hamilton in P2 and Max Verstappen in P3. What a podium. Definitely not something I suspected at all. My prediction was actually, I did predict Lewis to get P3 though, but I thought both Mercedes were going to be in front. So a very good turnout for Max, I would say. His first podium of the year, his best finish. Previously it was P5, now it's P3. The car, he feels like there's an opportunity to see himself fighting for the front of the field potentially, maybe down the line. We know that the Red Bull power unit has been probably the second best behind Mercedes this year in terms of what it is. The chassis is a little bit underdeveloped by that car, but each upgrade for them is getting better. It was noted and hinted at that in Austria, they will probably be trimming more of that weight to get all the way down to the benchmark requirements. So that car is only going to get more performance, more competitive as the season goes on as well. So there's a pretty good upgrade path for them as a team. I thought Isaac Hadjar had a very solid race weekend. He did get a plethora of penalty points for himself in the race, unfortunately, but with how big the gaps were between Colapinto and Hadjar was, able to hold on to that P5 finish. And that was, I would say, a very positive weekend for Red Bull as a whole, in a track that just across the field, the racing was very weird. And I want to hint on this before I close out this segment and say that Canada was a very energy deprived track. The tires, with the coolness of them, were very uncertain. The tires would cool in windows and drivers were complaining about it. They couldn't heat up their tires at all. Thankfully, we weren't given a wet race, and this was kind of hinted at on the broadcast. Had we been given a wet race, we don't even know how these cars would perform in. So maybe we dodged a bullet of even a worse, I would say, performance across the field. I think Mercedes is just in a class above their own at this point, at the moment. And, going into the European leg, we have some pretty scary, I would say, tracks, very energy intensive tracks, which these cars definitely struggle with being in that 50-50 window. We saw that there was some cars like the Aston Martin and the Cadillac who were 4 laps down. And I think as a spectacle, that's never great to see that your backmarker teams are being lapped 4 times in the race. And a lot of it had to do with reliability due to just pure pace. They had nothing. And like I said, turn 10 was a disaster across the entire field. And there was just a lot of sliding going on. And the cooler temperatures definitely did not assist in, the direction of where the cars were going. There was some fear, and this is why McLaren opted to go on those inter tires, saying that there was some slickness, some slipperiness that may, potentially have been a reason why they wanted to go on the inters in the first place. The track was a lot drier than what was expected. So it was just very interesting to see some of those decisions and choices. And I think the teams really just don't have a complete understanding of the tires, of how these cars are even going to perform on a track to track basis. And we're seeing that. And I think this is just pretty much summing up what 2026 is going to look like. And it's just going to be a season that us as fans are probably just going to have to get through, expecting Mercedes to probably come out as 1-2 favorites throughout the entire season. And hopefully, hoping that the ADUO and the 60-40 split for 2027 will give us a little bit more competitive racing, because I was a little bit disappointed in the overall competitiveness across the field compared to the Mercedes that were out front. Now, besides that, the Mercedes definitely kept it very interesting, and I thought that the Lewis and Max, battle was very good as well. But there definitely is some things that need to be worked on moving forward. But congratulations to Kimi Antonelli becoming the first driver in the history of Formula One to win their first 4 races consecutively. No driver has ever done that. So not only is he in elite company, but he is in company of his own for him. And he now leads the championship by 43 points as we head into Monaco next weekend. See the Ferraris being pretty good. I know that their corner speeds are the best of the field, and Monaco is a little bit different. It's an outlier on the calendar, so we may see some difference in qualifying, and that's good news for George Russell, right? If he can qualify, a couple positions potentially ahead of Kimi, because the Ferraris come into the picture, the McLarens are equally as fast if they showed what they did last year. We could see, George maybe make a comeback again, or we could see Kimi continue his confidence, continue his understanding of this car, how it handles, and, we could see him, who knows? It's anyone's race, I think, in Monaco with that up in the airness. So I'm excited to see what that is, even if the race doesn't give us a whole lot. I love going to Monaco, and it won't be as entertaining as the Formula E race, but it's Monaco. So there's always that little motorsport part of mine that just loves that track and for what it stands for. So anyways, with all of that being said, thank you guys so much. I wanted to say thank you for listening to all of that. There was a lot to talk about. I don't even know how long this episode's been going on for, but I feel like I've talked enough for this. If you liked, again, what you were listening to on this week's episode of the Open Wheel FM podcast, make sure that you give a like and a follow on your listening platform of choice. I will be back next week to cover all things in Detroit for IndyCar, as well as Monaco for Formula One. There'll be a lot to talk about, and all of the news and stuff leading up to that, I'll make sure to cover that as well, so you stay up to date on all of the open wheel news regarding what's going on. So thank you guys so much. I look forward to seeing you guys next week. Take care. Have a good one.